What's up, everybody? What's going on? Troy Jeffrey Allen here with Previews World. Of course, it is time for the roundtable discussion. So, just to give you guys a heads up, we're going to try to do these monthly from now on. Previews World Weekly is going away, and so in exchange for Previews World Weekly, I made a deal with the devil in order to make a roundtable show a monthly thing. This is something that we started during the pandemic, and we've done it sporadically here and there. Now we're going to try to make it a regular thing because we think that you guys love it. You guys seem to like it, judging by the views, and it seems to engage more of the conversations that are actively going on in the nerd realm. So, without further ado, let's dive into this month's other topic because we just did manga versus anime, but we're squeezing two in this month. This month's topic is, of course, the Ultimates, and of course, we're talking about this because, well, Ultimate Invasion just dropped at your local comic shop this past Wednesday. It is Brian Hitch and Jonathan Hickman teaming up to resurrect the Ultimate Universe, as we have found out. And so let's talk a little bit about Ultimate Invasion, but also the Ultimates as a whole. First up, our first guest, Mr. Grady from Alliance Comics and Games. What's up, Grady?
Hey, how's it going?
Doing all right, doing okay. Also joining us, I don't know, I guess he's not trying to show his face. Oh, he's okay. He's just trying to surprise us because he's doing something ridiculous. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. One and Only, Mr. Mystical Green Beanie. How's it going, MGB?
I'm not Miles Morales.
Are you sure?
Well, anyone can wear the mask.
Anyone can wear the mask. Apparently, that according to the movies, yes, this is true. Also, according to James Cameron, that's very funny. Also, joining us this week or this month, Action to Go-Go's Derek Scarzella. What's up, Derek?
What's up, everybody? I made it.
Yeah,
made it through flooding, dangerous driving, explosions, but I'm here. So,
is it flooding? Is it flooding over there?
It's raining really bad.
Oh wow, okay. I have not noticed. I know it's been raining nonstop in general in our area, but we're all in the same area by the way. We're all in the same tri-state, I guess I should say.
Yeah.
But I didn't realize that it was getting ugly out there. So all right. So why are we doing this? As I mentioned, Ultimate Invasion is dropping this week. But truth be told, I've been wanting to talk about the Ultimates for a very, very long time in some sort of roundtable discussion. It is one of my favorite books of the last 20-something years, I want to say. And I guess 2003 would technically make this the 20th anniversary of this book. So it's really fortuitous, or maybe not, maybe it's just marketing, that Ultimate Invasion dropped this year in particular. And so what we're going to do is we're not going to talk too much about the other Ultimate books, right? We're not going to talk too much about Ultimate Fantastic Four, Ultimate X-Men, Ultimate Spider-Man. How could I forget Ultimate Spider-Man? And instead, we're going to focus on the Ultimates. And the reason I say that is because I feel like you can kind of track the complications, failures, and successes of the Ultimates line based off of the health of the Ultimates itself. And so before we dive into the book, I just want some quick reactions. Derek, I figure you probably didn't read Ultimate Invasion, but I know Grady and I know Mystical Green Beanie did. So I want some quick reactions to Ultimate Invasion, the new book that just dropped. I'm going to let you go first, Grady, because you are to my left.
All right. Well, I'll start with the bad and then go to the good, which was, and correct me if I'm wrong, if I'm totally wrong about this, but as I recall, the Maker was last seen in Venom, number 25, 26.
Oh yeah, that's right. Yeah, fairly recently. Yeah,
he gets stuck in the Ultimate Universe, and he says basically he sees that there's a newscast saying the heroes are all dead or something to that effect, and he's like, perfect, and it was like a cliffhanger. And then I picked this up, and there was zero reference to that whatsoever. It's completely the Maker is in the 616.
Yeah.
And he's being held captive. I don't want to spoil the whole thing, but basically, we're gonna have some spoilers, but yeah, it seemed to just be retconning Donny Cates's status quo. There's no mention of the Maker having a symbiote, which was one of the cool developments in Donny Cates's run. Also, maybe this is all gonna be, maybe they're gonna fix it in some kind of way. Maybe there's something I don't know yet, but it seemed to be kind of breaking continuity. to a certain degree. I was like,
Mhm.
that was my biggest like concern with it.
Mhm.
But other than that, it was a great sort of setup issue. Basically, it felt like a free comic book day issue, really. But it was like,
Mhm.
you know, it felt like just like the beginning, like kind of just a tease of something. But it was cool to see the Maker again. It was cool to see the Maker written by Hickman again.
Mhm.
The sort of he brings out the personality really well, whereas you know Donny Cates kind of just writes him as like a heel. I think that like Hickman gets the kind of, at least this character in his own mind, he's the hero of the Ultimate Universe.
Yeah.
He's the protagonist, and you know he's the savior, and he's also like got this god complex. And this
Mhm.
particular the device that this issue applied really like maximized that god complex of like just really like what would he do with that if he really got to be God in a way.
So I should point out that the Maker is actually Ultimate Universe's Reed Richards. Like that was the big twist at one point in time. Is like you found out ultimately that it is actually Ultimate Reed Richards, and you basically are getting this story of almost what would have happened if Reed Richards had become the Doctor Doom of the entire universe, which actually makes me wonder: did he ever encounter Doctor Doom? Yeah, in Secret Wars,
Yeah,
right?
in Ellis's run of Fantastic Four, yeah.
Okay, all right, okay, gotcha.
He's
Well, I'm
also
talking
in the
about
first arc of
616.
Ultimate F.
Oh, yeah. Sorry, I think
Okay.
in Secret Wars.
Okay, yeah, I thought so on Secret Wars.
Yeah.
What about you, Miss Green Beanie? What do you think of Ultimate Invasion so far? Just one issue, but
I went into it with the best faith that I possibly can have. First of all, it was really refreshing seeing Brian Hitch do like an Ultimate Universe thing again. Like even though this entire issue more or less takes place in the 616, like Hitch kind of built that brand of no, this is the world outside your window. After 90s Marvel more or less didn't be the world outside your window anymore. So yeah, it was really refreshing to see Brian Hitch's his penmanship, his art brush back on an Ultimate imprint book again. It was also great to see Hickman take command of these characters again. It's one of those things where after House and Powers of X and how the X-Men line was kind of handled, I'm a little weary.
Yeah. Understandable.
Because I've had the that thing where where you look at like, bro, why are you dating dating the same chick? She cheated on you twice. No, but I love her. I feel like that with Hickman. But like it's not Hickman's fault, it's Marvel's fault. I love Marvel and I love Hickman, but like you did this with X-Men already. But no, like the book itself. The book itself I thought was really well handled. Even like little intricate, you know what I'm saying? You know that word.
Intricacies.
Like the font being different between Reed Richards and or I guess the Maker and everyone else in the 616.
Everyone is the 616, right?
Talks with like big bold letters, whereas Reed talks with like the lower cases. And Miles also talks with the upper cases, which I think is really interesting. That's a neat touch. I saw a couple people like also noticed that earlier today. Yeah, I'm fascinated to see where this goes. I don't know what they're gonna do, and I'm fascinated to see where it goes. I mean, I guess light spoilers, but at the end of the issue, it looked like Reed rebuilds an Ultimate Universe, but like the sequencing of the numbers is reversed.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
That was very fascinating.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'm interested. I'm on the ride. I'm here for the ride.
Yeah. I'm on the ride too. I think that like I am intrigued. I have trepidation now that I know that they're going to try to relaunch an Ultimate line after this. I was more pumped for this when I thought that it was going to be like a mini series that Hickman was going to do before he moved on to this secret Doctor Strange thing he's working on. But I liked how I liked how the Maker escaped. I thought that was really cool. I thought that was fun and cool. I like the whole using the encryption of Krakoa to like to like walk through into another reality. I thought that was also really great as well. And then like I said, the DNA of the breaking out of the team, and also just like the implications of where this is going beyond this. Like I think that the concept of the evil Reed Richards is a lot of fun, and they've gotten a lot of mileage out of him to the point that I actually maybe argue that he's probably been the most relevant, resonant bad guy that Marvel has had in the last couple of years at this point in time. Like, I don't think there's been many new bad guys that have really kind of been like, oh, like when you read it, you're like, oh shit, you know? So yeah, I appreciate that as well. I mean, mind you, it's a character that is, you know, from the ultimate line from about what, 10 years ago, but still, you know, it's an interesting introduction. So, all right, let's dive into the Ultimates itself, right? So, Derek, you've been silent for a while here. Take us back to if it was 2003 when you read it. What was your initial experience, and how did you come across the Ultimates, first of all?
Well, first off, just to out nerd everybody, it's March 2002.
Oh, it is? Okay, I'm sorry. All right, so it's 21 years ago.
but no, I was a huge Marvel fan back when it wasn't popular, right? And in the 90s, Marvel was I'm fond of 90s Marvel, but some of it was run of the mill. Some of it was stopping and starting. Like, it was very much X-Men focused, and that was like the heart and soul of, and Spider-Man, of course, and Wolverine of 90s Marvel. And I was always a comic book fan, but then this crazy comic showed up, this Ultimates comic. And basically what it felt like, it was the special forces of Marvel coming out. And you have this, exactly, like you have this hard PG-13 universe that's completely separate and so badass and so fun and so original. And I was just addicted. I was totally addicted to it from the beginning. And then they did it with X-Men, they did it with everything. But the Ultimates, you really felt that Mark Millar was swinging for the bleachers and just knocking it out of the park. Like, it felt like these writers were actually free. And famously, like, it came and went. Like, the scheduling of it was a bit wonky from time to time. But even so, like, Ultimate Fantastic Four was great. Ultimate Spider-Man was great. Ultimate X-Men was a lot of fun. But you could tell with those, they were sort of sticking to the same script a bit more. With the Ultimates, they really were doing something special. And it was really fun as time went on, watching the rest of Marvel catch up to the Ultimates.
That's a very good point, yeah.
If you notice, that's when Garth Ennis really went crazy with the Punisher. That's when Brian Michael Bendis went crazy with Daredevil. To me, it spawned a whole era of, hey, let's really push the art of comics and push what we can do with these characters in a way that was very unique. Even though some of those things I mentioned were still in continuity, seeing the Ultimate stuff was always great, because like when they did Ultimates Galactus, it was like, oh my God, where are they going to go with this?
Right, yeah.
And it was still true, sort of like this multiverse stuff they do now, like the latest Spider-Man movie, loved it. It was great, but it showed you what you could do with a reinterpretation while still maintaining the soul of it. And I was in high school when this came out.
All right, you're the prime demographic.
Exactly. And it was basically New X-Men was the best comic out, and the Ultimates. And it was really cool because I felt like the Marvel universe was growing up with me when I got my hands on the Ultimates. And then it was just magic until Ultimates 3 happened and it died.
we're gonna get to that.
Yeah, but anyway, I'll just shut up there and let me know if you have any questions or anything.
Okay, no, that's cool. Actually, Mystical Green Beanie, I'm gonna jump back to you real quick, because two things I want to know. Well, first of all, what is the current conversation around this book, do you think? What is the popular opinion of this book right now?
Of the Ultimates?
Yeah. Deep sigh.
It's hard to gauge, because you have people who grew up with the Ultimates who are like, no, this is great. This was like very transformative. At the time, it was amazing. But then you have a lot of newer Marvel fans, a lot of younger Marvel fans, who are like, I guess, part of that newer fan base. There's a lot of resentment that I've noticed towards the Ultimates. And I think a lot of that comes from just the way in which Marvel as an entity is viewed now versus its first, I think, the first 50 years of its history. Post MCU Marvel is very much, I mean, I get a lot of flack for saying this, but like post MCU Marvel is very much like, DC 2.0, I think, in terms of like the way in which it's viewed, the way in which it's marketed. And Ultimates is not coming from that place at all. So the sensibilities of the day when Ultimates came out, or there's Ultimates too, but when this came out, they're still kind of playing with the sensibilities that the Marvel Universe were like established with in like 1961 with Fantastic Four and Thor and Amazing Fantasy and whatnot. So it's really just like a culture clash of fandom, where there's the old fandom and the new fandom kind of coming at loggerheads there.
And, I find that really interesting because, like, the common, and I think it's kind of a misconception. It's not completely false, but the common thing I've heard a lot about the Ultimates is like, oh, this is the thing that inspired the MCU. And I think like there are some aesthetic things that definitely did inspire the MCU. Sam Jackson as Nick Fury, right? Captain America's World War II look in in the first film. Even Hawkeye's look as well. But beyond that, it does not reflect the tone of the Ultimates. Like, it does not, the other characters, the Iron Man that they chose to use is not the Ultimates Iron Man, which is a very specific design, right?
Yeah.
Like, versus like they chose to go with the Adi Granov Iron Man. Like, you know what I mean? So just stuff like that I kind of feel like is a slight misconception about the Ultimates and its influence on the MCU. Okay, what are you about to say, Derek?
Well, I would say what I see that they did with the Marvel movies that was sort of inspired by the Ultimates was the way it's reinterpreted. And I think that's something that gets overlooked.
Yeah.
Because if you pay strict attention to these characters, they're not canon. Like Thor's origin, he's not hitting a stick into the ground to turn into Thor. He's really just Thor.
He's just Thor, right?
There's no pretending to be not Thor. And to me, that comes from the Ultimates.
Yeah. I mean, there's definitely the Shield Avengers connection is definitely from the Ultimates as well. I should also point out, like, that direct, like, we are working for the government. But even but the pulling themselves away from the government is actually inspired by the 616 story. So there's also part of that as well. Grady, what was your reaction? So, like, I thought this interesting because Derek and I think both read this in real time, right? When it first came out. So we were dealing with it on a monthly basis. You and Joaquin, or you and Mystical Green Beanie, have read this after the fact. And so I'm curious what your initial reaction was to this. What is your take of the first run of the first arc of the Ultimates?
I was right at prime age I feel like I was at prime. I was like in middle school, I guess. But I read for some reason I read Ultimate X-Men, Ultimate Spider-Man, and Ultimates just didn't grab me. I mean, so maybe I wasn't at the prime age. Actually, maybe I was a little too young. I was probably a little too young to quite get it. But I was really into Ultimate X-Men. I was really into Ultimate Spider-Man, and I read like the crossovers, like Ultimate 6 and stuff like that, where the Ultimates would pop up. The moment when I really wanted to get into Ultimates, ironically, is after it died. I think I was like reading like a wiki or like some summary at some point of Ultimatum, and I realized that they had like killed the Ultimate Universe, and they had like literally just like taken like the comic and just ripped it in half. And I was like, I've always wanted to read a story like that. And obviously now I know there's like Marvel The End and all those comics that kind of do a similar thing. But the fact that there was like a whole continuity like before and after this event that like killed it, and so it's oddly like that's what was intriguing to me, was that it was like breakable in a way that the Marvel universe wasn't. That like and that's obviously partly because of the marketing and because of the sales going down, all those sorts of things. But yeah, so reading it like more recently, I did have more attention to like how dated it is in certain ways, and the pop culture references, and there was just a lot of like restating the political message in like a very like clarifying way and stuff like that. That was kind of dated in a certain sense, but it's I do think it's doing politics better than a lot of modern political comics are coming from Marvel. That's like my like biggest takeaway from it is that and people would say you can't do a comic like this now, but I think it's really like more like the editors are saying you can't do a comic like this now. I think you could do a comic like this today, but there's with that sort of British invasion, they all have a kind of a punk rock kind of heterodox like approach to writing that I don't really think Marvel editorial is looking for right now. They're looking for more like kind of people to make political messages, make anti-corporate messages, but not ultimately at the end of the day push the envelope in the way that I think Miller pretty consistently did at that time and still does, but definitely was then.
That's right. Actually, I thank you. Actually, I should point this out. It's Mark Miller, not Mark Millar, which is something I found out way after the fact. But yes, that is actually his name. So I think that, okay, so one of the things I think is really interesting, just from my perspective, is that, picking up this book for the first time, it's actually, of the two, Ultimates 2 and Ultimates 1, this is I don't want to say least favorite, because that makes it seem like I don't like it, right? But I love Ultimates 2, because I think Ultimates 2 is kind of like proof of the first book is always like the proof of concept, right? And the second book is like, okay, we got it. We know exactly what we're doing, right? And so, but going back to reread this now, right? Which I did before this show, I caught myself going from skimming to reading. Like, you know what I mean? And to me, that's the test. Like, you know what I mean? To me, that's the proof of quality right there. There are small bits of it that I forgot about. In particular, one thing that Joaquin and I have talked about quite frequently is that the book is satirical in a lot of ways. Yeah. And it's satirical in a way that I think the same people that don't like the Ultimates for various reasons also don't like The Dark Knight Returns. And I think the thing that people constantly miss about both of those books is that there's an underpinning of satire. And I'm glad you mentioned the British invasion, because these creators, particularly from that era of Marvel, were not American. And so a lot of people kind of mistake do you think the A on my head stands for France? They mistake that for, this is just propaganda. But Mark Miller is not from the U.S. Like, you know what I mean? Like, he's doing an impression of a John Wayne type of Captain America. You know what I mean? And I mean, like, all the interviews have said that. And so I've always found that interesting about people's take about it. It's just kind of like how these things age differently. And you talked a little bit about how certain things don't age well. I remember actually at the time, funny enough, people saying like, Freddie Prinze Jr. reference in this book, and was not Shannon Doherty, was the other the American
Shannon Elizabeth.
Shannon Elizabeth, in the book and whatnot, hanging out with Tony Stark. This book isn't going to age well, you know what I mean? And in that regard, yes, it is a particular time capsule from a particular era. Like, I can't deny that. But to your point, this is the type of story that you can't really do now. So that in itself makes it kind of like unique and special, I think, in a way. Joaquin, what was your initial reaction to the first Ultimate storyline?
Well, the first Ultimates that I read, so I was like kind of the perfect age for that Ultimate Universe. I was very much the audience that Bill Jemas and Bendis and Adi Arad?
Avi Arad?
Avi Arad. Like, when they were like trying to like reboot the Marvel Universe before the senior editors of Marvel said that's a terrible idea, don't do that. But like I was that audience that they were like reaching for, which they didn't ultimately get really. If you look at like sales analytics, and the core audience for the Ultimate Universe was mainly just older Marvel fans looking at, oh, that's the cool thing over there. But the intent was to get younger readers, and I was one of the 5 younger readers who jumped on.
Well, I'll say, I think it was more effective than you might want to give it credit for. I think that, as someone who was working at a comic shop at the time, there was a shift, a notable shift. Yeah.
Okay, but yeah, that for me that was the Marvel Universe. Ultimate Spider-Man, Ultimates, Ultimate FF, Ultimate X-Men. That was Marvel to me. And I'm not reading Ultimates in real time. But I was reading like the Ultimate Universe stuff in real time. And for me, it just hooked me immediately. I was in love with it until I fell out of love with it. And then I fell back in love with it again.
Yeah.
When Mark Miller came back and did like Ultimate Avengers. But yeah, when I read Ultimates, so I don't read the first Ultimates. I don't read this one until after like the middle of Ultimates 2, because Ultimates 2 got super delayed.
Yes,
everyone forgot
delayed.
about.
Oh my god!
Yes.
Like much like Dark Knight Returns, much like Watchmen, much like Hickman's Secret Wars, all books that got painfully delayed. No one remembers the delays because they don't matter.
Right.
No, they matter to me. The North remembers.
It mattered at the time, right.
But yeah, no, like I started reading the first Ultimates in the middle of Ultimates 2 because there's like a 4-month delay for that book, and this was when the first Ultimates was broken up into 2 trades back then. So that's how that's when I started reading Ultimates. It was very interesting too because I interacted with some of those characters in other books. Like the Ultimate show up in the Fantastic Four book. Nick Fury shows up a lot in Ultimate Spider-Man.
Yes,
he's a different character in Ultimate Spider-Man than he is in Ultimate.
I think that's mostly Bendis's.
Yeah, he's a way softer, more like cuddly dad figure, and in the Ultimates, he is, for all intents and purposes, the power is the greatest aphrodisiac. Like he's still alive. The dude from the Nixon administration. I can't think of his name. He's
Kissinger.
Yeah, like Nick Fury is basically like Henry Kissinger in the Ultimates, where he's like.
When you mentioned Bendis, he's had a flashback of like the Bendis dialogue wrapping around
the page.
Characters like, oh, God.
Are you Spider-Man? You're Spider-Man. I'm Spider-Man. You're Spider-Man. Who's Spider-Man? I'm Spider-Man.
Quick remark.
Actually, since you mentioned Ultimates 2, actually, let's go ahead and shift over to that because like that is kind of the notorious. So I mean, so actually, I'm glad you mentioned the delay, right? Because I remember the wait for that book, right? But then when it came out, I remember thinking to myself, like, God damn it! If you had to make me wait for a book, this is how you make me wait for a book and give me a good payoff, give me a solid payoff. Like there was a gatefold fight sequence in there. The book was bigger than normal. It was absolutely beautiful. Like I mentioned, Ultimates 2 is actually my favorite of the 2, right? I've heard rumors that Grant Morrison ghost wrote some of this. I don't know how true that is. I have not heard anyone confirm that, and I probably will never hear anybody confirm that. But I've heard aspects of it. I also know that Mark Miller was dealing with an illness for a period of time, which is one of the reasons the book was delayed.
IBS, I think.
Or something like that, right? Yeah. I think it was a little bit more serious than that. But like, so I think that was also part of why it's delayed. And my understanding is that maybe Grant Morrison did some of the lifting on this at one point in time before he left Marvel and went back to DC. That said, I think it is a phenomenal book, and like it's better than the first one, and I think the first one's pretty special. But it is just an awesome thriller. Like it just culminates in the most explosive, just absolutely stupid Michael Bay
Yeah.
action sequence of all time, any comic book ever. Jack, you said you look like you're going to say something.
Well, it's the big budget Avengers film everyone always wanted.
Yes.
And it's the quality of the art,
Mhm.
the quality of the storytelling, and we've seen big stuff from the Avengers before.
Oh yeah,
like some '90s Perez stuff. I mean,
Mhm.
every character on the page fighting at the same time.
Yeah.
But there was something about the way he did it.
Mhm.
So much buildup over those 12 issues
Mhm.
to finally get the book, and you're like, yeah, I remember the same thing, Troy. Like, I waited 4 months for this. What do we got? And you're just like, what the hell? Like you open
Right.
and you see everything.
You're right.
It was a special moment in comic history, and you knew it was special, and it felt special, and it was just amazing. And then the jokes, I think the A in my head stands for France. I mean, that was a cultural moment, man. Everybody was losing their minds over that.
I think that was the first one.
And then
I'm
Ed
pretty sure
Brubaker
that
had
was
to write a
the
whole
first one?
issue
Oh,
to
never
like
mind.
apologize for it.
You said what?
Then Ed Brubaker had to write an entire apology for it on behalf of
did?
Marvel and his Captain America.
Oh, really? Interesting.
In the main Captain America, because
Right.
you have Steve do a whole, and it doesn't fit in anywhere. I mean, it fits in like kind of okay, but you can tell like, oh, this is a reaction to Ultimates. The French get real mad, so Brubaker's like, Sharon, the French, they suffered so hard. It's like, no, lame. Chad meme Captain America.
Right. I mean, that's the whole thing, right? Grady, you've read Ultimates too, I'm assuming, right?
Yeah, I just reread it. Yeah.
You perked up when I mentioned this. Like, what was from the book?
So I guess like, well, I'll just like lay into like the politics. I really think that this was like hitting America and American imperialism in a way that was very, very cynical and interesting, and like didn't really tell you. At the end of the day, it did give you this big dramatic, triumph at the end, but like, there's still this murkiness throughout the whole thing of like who are the good guys here, and I feel like in like a historical history, the history of comics.
You went away for a second. All right, getting choppy.
Oh, I'm sorry.
There you go.
Can you hear me right?
Yeah, you're good.
Captain America punching Hitler. That's where comics were like pure kind of propaganda. And they were just sort of like, doing service for American empire. And then you have these different periods. But in the 80s, you really get the deconstruction of all of that and this kind of moral gray sensibility through Alan Moore, through Dark Knight Returns. Basically there's like a morally gray period, and the 90s kind of reversed some of that and brought it back into just fun comics. And I'm totally doing the sweep, so of course there's going to be exceptions, but like the Ultimates too, I think you go back into that 80s sensibility, especially in the post 9/11 era, where we're really doing some damage to the rest of the world and showing ourselves as this empire that can't be challenged. And this was like the chickens coming home to roost was basically the story there. And
it really was.
I feel like now we're like a lot of mainstream comics are back to that Captain America punching Hitler. And it's kind of like we're almost trying to put the genie back in the bottle from Ultimates 2. Ultimates 2 like unleashed can of worms of like moral gray, like moral uncertainty. And sort of deconstruction of that Manichaean hero narrative for America. And now we're kind of like, if you compare like the way that comics are being written, or even this new Marvel show is being written about Russia and like Ukraine, to the way that Miller is taking on the axis of evil and the Iraq War, it's like you couldn't really get away with saying what he's saying about America today. I don't think in Marvel. Like with the current editorial.
I never thought about that being like, I definitely noted the politics of that second book in particular, but I never thought about how the 90s, I wouldn't say it's definitely not like the World War II era propaganda era, but it's definitely an emphasis on just everything's fine, it doesn't matter, type of energy. And like you kind of hit a point where you get to the Authority and the Ultimates, right? And I think those two definitely paired together are kind of nice bookends. In addition to also being by Mark Miller in some regard and Brian Hitch. And I never thought about it, but there is a shift after that, right? Where there's kind of like this moral ambiguity that kind of permeates everything. Because then we get Civil War, which is like a crossover about moral ambiguity.
Yeah.
Like, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So, okay, that's really interesting. Joaquin, you look like you're about to say something. Go for it.
Well, yeah, it's kind of interesting you brought up The Authority, because that's a book I didn't read until very recently. But reading that and then like jumping into this, it was so bizarre because, well, I mean, first of all, Brian Hitch did both of them. Yeah, like the Authority definitely, I think, opens the floodgates for the style of storytelling we're seeing more in comics now, that like widescreen cinematic.
Oh yeah.
Like people kind of like disparagingly refer to it as like Netflix pitches or movie pitches, but like that's like the style that Warren Ellis and Brian Hitch kind of established with, like, let's do big action. Like, this is a blockbuster movie.
Right. Yeah. Open up the panels.
Yeah.
To your point, real quick, like what those guys were doing was totally new.
Yeah.
Back then, like the quality of art.
Yeah.
That those guys were bringing to the table, like Frank Quietly, Brian Hitch, like that whole style that was absent in Marvel, was absent in DC. You didn't even get it in the 90s Image, really. Like that whole, it was really crazy how, and the Ultimates was super important in this, opening up comics to being more cinematic and really changing the scope. And it was just really incredible when they started bringing that, because you could go to the comic shop and you were getting the movies you wanted to see on screen every week. But that's just very cool.
No, actually, I just want to point out with the comics as movies argument, right? Like this problem of like, oh, it's just a movie pitch. I want to point out that even guys like Jack Kirby and like a lot of these guys from, like, the pioneers of this format for superheroes, right? Like even those guys were looking to movies for the language, like, and how they could translate that to the page. So it's not even something that is new because of the Authority or the Ultimates or the MCU. It's been always there, because truthfully, you have a whole generation that grew up with movie magic being a real thing, and that was the language that they understood. So
well, they're both visual mediums.
They're both visual mediums.
Number one, and I don't know if anybody pays attention to the book market, but it's no more like, it's not really a literature market anymore.
Right.
Every book is a movie pitch.
Right. Yeah.
Every book is cinematic now. Every book is just a script with a couple more paragraphs added. But even that, like, that's a mid 2010s thing.
Yeah.
When Millard did this, when Grant Morrison and Alan Moore were kicking around, I think only Alan Moore was getting his stuff turned into movies, so it wasn't like everybody was getting that treatment. Like this, Millard really pushed that so hard that I think at a time it was like anybody could get a freaking movie deal or a Netflix deal. But this book broke that ground. This book cracked that open, and it came down to him. Like just to bring it back to what we were talking about before, like mentioning Freddie Prinze Jr., mentioning Shannon Elizabeth. Well, that casting element was completely new in comics. Like making it, or if they did it before, like SNL showed up, but it was a total. What that allowed him to do was help movie people visualize. Oh, Nick Fury could be Sam Jackson. Like we can just translate this. This isn't too hard at all. So there was a whole method to that madness that he really perfected. The sacrifices, you date the material. The plus is that you make it more real for more people at the time that you're actually doing it.
Yeah, and there's the thing that I always kind of go to when people criticize the Ultimates for being dated is that Marvel Comics traditionally, their whole thing is, this is the world outside your window.
Right. Yeah.
You go back to like Spider-Man in like the 60s and 70s, he's making references to like movies that are coming out like in that year.
Right.
You have like characters showing up on like the axis of evil will like pop in a room and they're like, oh, the Avengers, and then Iron Man's like, well, who do you expect, John Belushi? Like it's
right, yeah.
They're referencing what's happening in the moment, and I really kind of appreciate how Mark Miller was just kind of like playing that up.
Yeah.
Like you have like a whole bit where after Nick Fury gets beat up by Captain America, I mean everyone in the Australian got beat up by Captain America, but when Cap like calms down, he's like, sorry for the nose, General, and Fury's like, this nose has been broken more times than Robert Downey Jr.'s. Like it's topical. Right. Marvel's always been topical. So I mean, yeah, you run the risk of being dated, immediately. But that's, I don't know, man. I'm not gonna be mad at Marvel Comics for doing Marvel Comics stuff.
They're doing Marvel Comics stuff, exactly. Actually, you just reminded me. One of my favorite classic Spider-Man stories, actually by the late great John Romita, is a two-parter with the Green Goblin Spider-Man, where he discovers Spider-Man's identity, and there's a fight on top of the Empire State Building, and one of the kids is like, there's a kid watching. The kid goes, like, give it to him, Spider-Man. The kid's mom is like, Noah, what would Soupy Sales say? And I remember reading that as a kid and being like, who the hell is Soupy Sales? And it turns out it was a TV show in the 60s. Like, I mean, that's just
right.
So any more thoughts about Ultimates 2?
Yes. I'm going to be a massive dork for like the 30 seconds, so bear with me. A big thing that I don't think, or I haven't like heard in a lot of conversation about the Ultimate Universe in general, is Brian Hitch completely redefining the way in which superhero costumes are designed. Superhero costumes, for the most part, were like, they're simple. You have the lines here, and they go over the musculature and the colors, and boom, draw it. Everyone draw it. This is a company line. But Brian Hitch really established, like, no, these people are wearing clothes. Like when you look at Captain America's outfit, he doesn't have the pirate boots. He's wearing combat boots. He has a GI, like it's a show monkey outfit, but like there's some commentary about Captain America already being like a propaganda, like puppet. But like it's that by way of like Under Armour. Like he's wearing like clothes. Iron Man has there's a whole commentary in the back of Ultimates. This is like the deluxe edition, I think. But Brian Hitch talks about how he would joke with Mark Miller about how you go back to those old Iron Man comics and the helmet is just the size of Tony's head. Yeah. And they're like, how do you fit that thing on your head, man? So they designed a suit around like an F-15 and said, what if an F-15 was like a mech suit?
Yeah.
So yeah, no, that's like another big thing that like no one really talks about. I think the costume design helps make that universe feel more tangible. Yeah, and then you see that philosophy bleed out into the main Marvel universe now, particularly everything from the all new, all different era onward, where like you have like John Romita Jr. redesigning the Captain America outfit to be more basically what the MCU outfit would turn into. And like all the other newer characters, their costumes are more like movie friendly. Yeah. It like makes that universe feel more lived in. So I don't know. I think Brian Hitch deserves a lot of credit on top of already crafting like mind blowing 8-page what is this? This is ridiculous. What's going on here?
Right. Just crazy.
Well, to your point, I think that really touches on something important, because that's something that Marvel struggled with in the 90s. And I think, there's a famous Thor redesign that happened where it wasn't the classic red, white, and silver or whatever his thing is. It was like blue and black and everything. And DC like famously changed Superman too, and they just reverted it back. But to your point, it wasn't until they started from scratch, not Heroes Reborn, which they also did in the 90s, which sort of failed. But it was sort of like what the Ultimates was. It was like a prototype for the Ultimates. But it wasn't until they really started from scratch and owned it that it finally stuck and it made sense.
I also think this was prototype for the Ultimates. Spider-Man 2099.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What makes you say that?
Well, the Ultimates is cyberpunk, and the Ultimate Universe is cyberpunk in a certain. I mean, it's called now, and I don't like using this term, but cape punk. But like, cape punk,
What?
you heard of that?
Yeah, you know, like
No. I don't like it
It's
already.
horrible. No, but it's cyberpunk. It is.
I say
evil.
he nay.
it's like
But
Push
it's
or Heroes.
corporate intrigue, you know, morally gray characters, you know, sort of murky business deals and all this sort of stuff. And you know, Iron Man's whole thing, he's basically a character out of Cyberpunk 2077 or Blade Runner 2049. You know, it's all and those elements have been in superhero comics since the 80s, or even really kind of before the 80s.
Forever, yeah.
But yeah, I think the Ultimates is kind of a cyberpunk take on the Marvel universe, and I also think the 2099 is a kind of a trial run of a lot of that, especially Peter David's run of Spider-Man 2099.
Interesting. Okay.
Yeah.
You know, you've been pushing Spider-Man 2099 on me lately, and I should read it.
Was a.
Oh, it's great.
Yeah. Marvel
I've
Prison
got
Print.
sitting in my drawer. Good.
Also, something that I noticed and something that Grady reminded me of actually yesterday was how the Heroes Reborn universe feels like a proto Ultimate Universe, and I feel like building up to the Ultimate Universe, Marvel had several trial runs for here's how we reboot not the Ultimate Universe. Here's how we reboot the Marvel Universe. And that gets us to the Ultimates. Like I think Spider-Man Chapter 1. I think it's by John Byrne. That's a proto Ultimate Spider-Man. There's also Heroes Reborn. Like reading all those together. Heroes Reborn Iron Man, Heroes Reborn Hulk, Heroes Reborn Thor.
You read all those?
Thor's kind of its own thing, but like, yeah, exactly. But like all those things, they feel very like Marvel's trying to update their universe. They're trying to be more topical. People always meme on the whole thing where Captain America has like a Nazi eagle on his forehead in the Heroes Reborn universe, but that is like that is a plot point in Ultimate Captain America, which like no one read, but we like to make fun of anyway. Yeah, it's a plot point.
I know Rob Liefeld has got nothing but crap for that Captain America, but I loved it. Every issue. I read it stem to stern. I loved it, man.
And also, if you're gonna make fun of Rob Liefeld, you got to make fun of Jack Kirby and Mike Mignola and anyone with like a distinct art style.
Yeah, fair. Okay, that's fair. I'm not about like bullying the '90s artists for being 90s artists. I mean, it was successful. Sorry, it was successful for a period for a reason. So, like, you know, I can't hate on it too much. And I was knee deep in it too. So.
Some of it's flat out better than what they're doing now.
Right.
You know, hate the
sameness.
But
yeah, right. I mean, the artist style had personality, that's for sure.
Yeah. But I mean, you could do Heroes Reborn Iron Man right now, it would fit right in.
Right.
Like, such quality art.
They tried to.
So impactful.
Jason Aaron did do that.
Oh, the Heroes Reborn book?
The Heroes Reborn book.
Yeah.
It was interesting.
Yeah, that would have been like a year ago.
I don't know what he was doing.
I totally missed this. Okay.
I've been.
Blade wakes up in a universe where the Avengers never existed, and this what are they? The Squadron Supreme are the Avengers, and they're actually like controlled by evil conspiracy. But you have to find out who's behind. It's one of the 7 events they did that year.
Right. Okay. Yeah, I mean, that's also part of the issue. Actually, you know what? You guys reminded me of 2 things while we were talking about. There was the Ultimates versus the Squadron Supreme, or Supreme Power at one point in time, which I don't like. I remember loving Supreme Power when it first came out, but then they shifted it to Marvel Knights and then shifted to the Ultimates. I lost track of it. Didn't want to read it anymore.
Well, Marvel lost track of it too because that book is weirdly super important to the Ultimate Universe. Like, but no one like. This is like also one of the big problems with the Ultimate Universe. Just looking back at it, and it is kind of indefensible. Continuity is just like it's a limp noodle.
Yes, yeah.
Like you'll have like in this in Ultimates, you reference the Fantastic Four already existing. Where Nick Fury's trying to like, no, I'm putting a team together, and we can't get the Fantastic Four because that'll be bad press because they're crazy, they're wacky, doing crazy things.
But the book hadn't even come out yet, and then we find out.
And then like Ultimate Fantastic Four is like an origin story, and it doesn't match up. But like the whole thing with Squadron Supreme or this Ultimate Power, Reed Richards screws up the multiverse, or like he tries to send a signal through the multiverse, which is very fascinating going back to now, given like the post-Secret Wars status quo of that character and how he's kind of become like multiverse Doctor Doom essentially. But yeah, like he like infects the Supreme Power universe with like these like multiverse spores, and then Reed Richards has to go on trial. But then you find out that like it was actually Nick Fury who infected the AI that Reed sent through the portal. So then all of the Ultimates just have Nick. They just decide, no trial, no nothing. Just go like, no, all right, Nick Fury, you're stuck here. Pay for your crimes. And he just magically shows back up when Mark Miller wants to use him for Ultimate Avengers.
I mean, you also reminded me, actually, Ultimate Captain America, actually, I loved. And I actually really liked that story. That was a really good story by Jason Aaron.
Yeah.
Because it involves Nuke. And there's a whole, like, religious aspect to it, which definitely would not fly now.
Does anybody speak American here?
Right, yeah. Well, I mean, the book ends with Captain America reading the Bible to Nuke. Like, that legit would not happen now. Like, no one would do that. No one would touch that at all right now, currently. So now we're freewheeling, right? So let's get into all the messy bits, because then it gets weird. And I'll be honest with you, by the time the death of Spider-Man rolls around, I kind of had just been done with the Ultimates line. And here's the thing: the death of Ultimate Spider-Man is a really good story. But I was pretty much only reading Ultimate Spider-Man till this conclusion, and then I kind of stopped. But before that, we got into Ultimates 3. And the thing I find fascinating about this is, it's considered one of the worst comics of all time, which is. And I mean, I'm just saying this as like, there's like, I looked at the Wikipedia page and it linked to an article and like fans like saying that it is one of the worst comics of all time. But also, I think it's really interesting because this was supposed to be Joe Madureira's like big return.
Yeah.
And both of these things have like kind of come to pass in a weird way. It's funny because he just released a new Battle Chasers issue number 10 after like several years as well. But yeah,
Troy, 9 years, decade.
Okay, you might be right about that. I think there was like a 10, like about 4 years, a number 9 about 4 years ago. But yes, I feel you on that.
News to me.
But yeah, I remember kind of getting early. I remember jumping into Ultimates 3 early based off of the strength of like, okay, Joe Mad's back. That's cool. Like, he was a 90s guy, and I remember liking his stuff at the time. Not having strong feelings about it, thinking that Jeff Loeb wrote Long Halloween, and that was one of my favorites, and Dark Victory was one of my favorite Batman stories. It should be good. But in the end, it really kind of felt like, I don't know, it's in an attempt to duplicate Miller's edginess, it just feels kind of like falsely nihilistic. Like, it's like nihilism from someone who doesn't understand nihilism.
Well, that's like the thing that. Oh, my bad, you guys.
Well, I've got let me put it, because I experienced this pain in live action, right? Like day by day, issues coming out. And for me, it was a couple different things. Like almost self-destruction on Marvel's part, because by the time you got to Ultimates 3, like I said before, a lot of the main Marvel Comics universe catched up, right? So now you had these two. It's sort of like Disney Studios animation versus Pixar right now. Like You know, do you really need two studios? Why should they compete? So I feel like it was almost detuned on purpose. I was really surprised that Joe Mad's art was so good after all these decades. Like, he obviously didn't lose anything, but it was also obvious that Jeff Loeb, unfortunately, you know, I've read his stuff, I've loved it before. This was not the right book for him. No, and that was glaringly obvious too. So it almost felt like they needed to end the Ultimates, and they just ham-fisted it in a way that unfortunately didn't please anybody, you know. And that was sort of my take on it, because I remember reading it. I was sort of excited for it, you know, Joe Mad fan from back in the day. I was a kid when I read Battle Chasers, and then we saw this, and like, people are getting eaten, and their heads are blowing up at the same time. And it just all felt so forced, compared to the blockbuster, like, big budget fun we got from all the other comics in the Ultimates line. But I feel like it was time for the Ultimate Universe to die, and this was the only way they could really pull it off. And it just, like I said, it didn't. They ended up not making anybody happy, unfortunately. But then a bunch of the other comics were doing great anyway. So, you know. But anyway, that was my take on it.
Grady, did you read Ultimates 3? Did you get to that point?
I read Ultimatum. I haven't read Ultimates 3.
Yeah. Well, you know what? That is also on the list of, nah, I'm good. And it's also written by Jeff Loeb.
I found Ultimatum. Well, touching on the nihilism, first of all, how do you? Sorry, I don't want to totally bring us down a whole other rabbit hole. How do you feel about The Boys?
I'm not a big fan of The Boys either, and I like Garth Ennis. I like a very particular type of Garth Ennis, and The Boys has always been a bridge too far for me.
Yeah, I read The Boys from stem to stern. I read the first issue, and then I stayed with it when DC actually dropped it, and then it went to Dynamite. Like, I remember that whole debacle where DC was like, "Hey, wait a minute, what the hell's going on here? We don't want anything to do with this."
Right.
To the end, and I don't know, what's the question? Are you comparing and contrasting it to The Boys?
Because we're talking about nihilism, and I think that, like, Mark Miller is walking like a certain like line with the nihilism in with the moral gray area of Ultimates 2, and I think that The Boys just jumps all the way headfirst into
for sure.
I feel like The Boys does. The Boys is, I mean, Alan Moore on acid,
right?
Like, it's watching it on acid. Like, it's all of the bad stuff about superheroes face first. I think it should have been like, it could have been better if it was like half as many issues. Like, some of this did get repetitive.
Oh yeah, all those side issues were kind of necessary.
Yeah, but The Boys' nihilism, I think, was so much different than what Millar was trying to do. Millar has too much love for the material, whereas Ennis was trying to burn everything down.
But interestingly, I think The Boys show is kind of, we were talking about how the Ultimates were so different from the MCU, and I think The Boys show has kind of been the closest we're going to get to like a TV show of the Ultimates. Not to say that obviously it's very different, but in terms of like the political, social commentary, the deconstruction of the superhero archetype, the edginess, all of that sort of stuff, like that was sort of in your face if you're an MCU fan or a DC fan, of like, what if we just did this but like darker and more real, in a similar way to how the Ultimates was kind of a satire of the Marvel universe.
Well, I
don't know, man. I think I'm gonna challenge you a little bit there.
Okay.
Let me challenge you a little bit there, because I think the first Avengers and Captain America Civil War and maybe like Winter Soldier, like the best Marvel films really are Ultimate stories.
Okay.
And apart from maybe a little bit more blood and guts, I think that's like the closest Marvel was going to get, unless they really went rated R. And I think the best of the Ultimates was really used for the movies in that sense. If anybody disagrees, feel free to let me know.
Well, I
would say if we're gonna get like into like word semantics, like we're on Reddit, but I wouldn't refer to the Ultimates as being nihilistic. as much as I would refer to it as being irreverent.
Yeah,
Like
yeah, yeah.
there's
Yeah.
still, it is a big thing that I like get into arguments with people on the internet because I'm a dork. But like I
And
always
that's your God-given right as a dork.
exactly. But I always resist and rebuke this notion that Ultimates is a mean-spirited story.
Oh, absolutely. No, I don't
Like,
agree with that at all.
It's taking really
Does
challenging
anybody else break?
and morally relative concept or like concepts and subject matter, and it's like running these characters through the ringer, but it's not doing it in spite of celebrating everything that superheroes are inherently. I always go back to that last like 2 or 3 issues of Ultimate 2, which is a Grand Theft America, where that's where Mark Miller he takes the adult gloves off and is like, all right, we know who the good guys are, we know who the bad guys are, and superhero comics. Like you have that like really great bit where like some of the liberators are trashing like Midtown, and you have like Captains Britain, Captain Italy, and Captain France. They're like with their bowler caps and they're like 3-piece suits, and the liberators are like, "Go away, citizens!" And they're like, "Oh, I bet you ever watched Superman before?" And they do the Superman like rip, and it's like, oh, it's superheroes. It's
superheroes.
Yeah, like there is some there's a clear love for the superhero concept there, and I always disagree when there's like the difference between like the boys and Ultimates. I always disagree when people say that like the Ultimates is like a cynical take on superheroes. It's taking those characters and updating the politics of the Marvel universe. But it's never, I don't think it's ever throwing them under the bus.
No, I agree.
Or no more than like Jack Kirby or Stan Lee or Larry Lieber or anyone else did in like the 60s and 70s when you go back and read old Daredevil comics or old X-Men comics. Like a lot of those books are also very satirical.
Yeah.
Compared to like the DC comics that are coming out of the day, and some of the
by comparison,
like comics in Charleston, superhero comics that were coming out at the time period. Those are very much like the archetypal, like hands on the hips, and like Superman says, "Don't say no to drugs," because Nancy Reagan she knows what she's talking about. Like it's like you have like Spider-Man getting chased by the cops because J. Jonah Jameson thought it would like boost viewership of his like crappy like experimental television channel to like say that Spider-Man's like a threat and a menace. You have just after the JFK and Nixon televised debate, which was like the first televised presidential debate, Jack Kirby and Stan Lee playing on that idea by having Boulevard Trask go head to head with Charlie Xavier over the potential threat that mutants pose to American society. So like the Ultimate Universe, I think, is just an extension of the classic 616 universe. It's just taking those sensibilities and like putting them under a more cinematic lens and like growing up some of the politics a little bit, because we are post Dark Knight Returns, post Alan Moore, Watchmen era.
Yeah, and if there's one thing I've learned, is that all those British and those UK invasion guys are Alan Moore babies.
Yeah.
Oh, especially Warren Ellis.
Exactly. Yeah.
If I was going to sharpen it up, I would totally agree. Like, I think the Ultimates comes from a place of love and reverence.
Yeah.
Like, all of the Ultimate stuff, like, it may deconstruct a little bit, but it's just like the new Spider-Man film, the Miles Morales Spider-Man movie. Like, the core of Spider-Man is there.
Yeah.
With the boys, you give the same thing a lobotomy, and you take the core out, and you say, no, it's really... I don't even know if I can talk about it on YouTube. You know what I'm saying?
Right, yeah.
No, it's really this pretending to be that.
Yes.
Right.
That's a key difference there. But I think the core of it there, like, there's a very serious corporate message in the boys that I think is shared with the Ultimates.
You mean anti-corporate?
Yeah.
Anti-corporate. Yeah, I think
Exactly.
Disney is now kind of what they're called, like what basically bought in the boys in a way. But it's funny that Amazon is making the boys, and Amazon is also bought. So it's like bought versus bought in this weird kind of way. But I feel like
and it always has been. Whatever.
Yeah, it always has been. Yeah, but Ultimates, it's sneaking in. It's like sneaking in through this corporation, through this mainstream comic, this very, I guess, critical. I don't like just calling it deconstructive, but I guess where do we go from here? Kind of message. This message that like we need to do something about this. We need to reconsider, re-examine things. And like I think that the MCU is kind of saying maybe we don't really need to question any of this. Maybe we don't really need to re-examine. Maybe corporations. Tony Stark, he's Iron Man. He's the CEO of a corporation. He's a good guy, and we don't need to worry about it. It's like, the corporations have it covered. Like it's that kind of sort of go back to sleep, America. Like that's kind of the vibe I feel. Yeah. And I love these movies. Don't get me wrong. I find them very entertaining, but I do not find them that socially critical or nuanced or like interesting. I find them like it's fun popcorn in a kind of way.
I'm going to give a little pushback on that one too. Okay. And I only say that because there are certain movies in the MCU that I think are critical, right? Critical of establishment, right? I think the first Iron Man does do that, right? Yeah. I think Winter Soldier certainly does that. I think Civil War certainly does that. And I think that there are other movies in the MCU that definitely don't do that and probably don't need to do that, but there are movies that probably should be scrutinized a little bit more, like Captain Marvel. so yeah, I feel you on that.
One of the things that I think is very interesting, where you guys are talking about Vought versus Vought, which Mark Miller also kind of like plays with that whole idea of there being two sides, but the two sides are just being ruled by they're being played against each other by like one person or like one entity. But that's where I brought up earlier that I think the sensibilities of like the new age Marvel kind of lend themselves to being a DC 2.0, where DC is traditionally like the House of Heroes. It's the pantheon. These are the paragons upon Mount Olympus. And don't question Superman because he said dreams makes people happy, and Manchester Black is not a straw man because blah 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 blah. And that comic is good for some reason.
The Authority versus the Elite?
Yeah.
I mean, I'm sorry, the Superman versus the Elite?
The Action Comics 775. I don't know. But I feel like Marvel's kind of veered more into that direction of like, don't think about it. The good guy said the good guy thing, so now good guy.
Right.
And that's where Ultimates, I think, diverges from the MCU. But this is more so just a side effect of the MCU being a major corporate thing that has to appeal to like 9-year-olds so they can sell Backpack to Disney World. And that's like ultimately the whole thing, like just superhero movies in general. Like you can't really, for me at least, you can't really get satisfying like the same level of like satisfying like I don't know, there's something about comics because no one looks at them, like they can kind of do whatever they want. Yes. Movies have all these eyes on them, so you have to like dot your I's, cross T's,
right? Yeah.
Well, I think you have to remember that good art can be an accident, and with the Ultimates, they were swinging for the bleachers. They were being more cinematic. This was the Bush presidency, so people were really allowed to rail against the government, and the Ultimates were not unique in that regard. If you want a perfect example of what I'm talking about, read Black Summer by Warren Ellis and Jose.
God.
That is as 2000s a comic in essence as you can get. It's also an awesome read. I don't
never
know.
Get that ever again.
Yeah, it'll never be done again. But I mean, that is the most critical I've ever seen a comic be of like a bunch of different stuff.
But also
that's
really nuanced too.
Word. In the movie, in movies too, but like movies like Fight Club, just a little bit of a segue.
Yeah.
But there's a famous story about Fight Club where Rupert Murdoch saw the movie because he owned Fox at the time. Fox made that movie. Saw it in the theater. He literally said, "What the hell is this?" Because again, if you watch that movie, it's skewering capitalism, it's skewering America, it's skewering masculinity, it's skewering femininity. It's sticking an eye in everything it can get its hands on. Sticking a thumb in the eye of everything it can get its hands on. And that's an accident. And that's sort of what the Ultimates was. Like the Ultimates was a happy accident. We got it, and then they literally destroyed it. With and Ultimates 3. And a part of it is these things just can't. I mean, and in my mind, it ends at Ultimates. I know there was like other Ultimates that Millar did afterwards, where he brought the sauce back and did great. There's other stuff, but for me, it's like Ultimates 1, 2, 3. That's it. There's other stuff we got to enjoy, but that little moment in comic history is a happy accident, and you need to be happy it's there. You need to get it in physical copies so you can keep it on your bookshelf and just read it whenever.
Well, so hold on. Actually, I'm curious. Like, okay. So, are you saying they weren't intentionally trying to satirize certain things, or you're saying, like, where are you coming from with that?
I'm saying they got away with it while they could.
Okay, there you go.
Yeah,
okay.
that's the hero of that. Like a whole bunch of people got away with it.
Yes. Yeah.
It was like the Ultimates. I think Ultimate Avengers. I'll take up for the Ultimate Avengers stuff because there's also like I guess penance for dragging them for so many years. I read that material in like preparation for our discussion today. It actually feels like a really good extension of everything that Mark Millar and Brian Hitch were doing with the first two Ultimates.
Yeah,
because all that kind of like culminates in I think a perfected version of Civil War. Because I'm not the biggest fan of the first Civil War. I think there are good ideas there, but it just doesn't quite stick the landing.
Civil War as a whole is a fun experience. The main Civil War book is just all peaks and no valleys.
Yeah, and that was like my big problem with it. But I think by the time you get to Ultimate Avengers, where you have Nick Fury's Black Ops Avengers going against Carol Danvers, Public, no, these are the heroes, guys.
Right,
the Public Ultimates. And then you find out like everything's kind of like being engineered by Gregory Stark, who's Tony's like evil twin brother. Which they telegraph that like in the first issue, but
they do. Yeah,
they really make you think, oh, maybe he's actually a good guy. Nope, he's a bad guy. It's exactly as you thought. He kind of like does a Black Widow 2.0 because he did the same thing with Black Widow in the first two Ultimates. He's like, yo, Russian spy. I should be maybe wary of you. Oh no, she's cool. And then nope, actually, what you thought was the thing. She's evil. But they do a really interesting corporate kind of takeover. Not corporate takeover. That's not the right term. But like they do something really interesting where Gregory Stark is trying to like franchise the Ultimates and franchise Shield.
All right. Was Tony Stark dead at that point?
No, but his cancer is metastasizing. So
right. Oh my God, we didn't even talk about Ultimate Iron Man and like how that got swept under the rug. The Orson Scott Card book that got swept under the rug. They was also very late. I just want to get through this real quick. Sorry, it was very late and it came out over the course of I guess the earlier portion of the Ultimates line. And by the time it ended, things had changed so drastically that I don't know which Ultimates book it was, but they basically said, oh, that was a TV movie about Tony Stark's life, and it's not the actual story of Tony Stark in the Ultimates universe. So I'm sorry. Anyway, go ahead.
No, that was either Warren Ellis's Ultimate Iron Man miniseries, or that was in Ultimate Avengers. No, it wasn't. It was the that was the Warren Ellis Ultimate Iron Man.
Just to chime in, like that whole point, and I think Grady mentioned this before, like that was probably the most frustrating aspect of the Ultimate Universe period. They were doing so many different things at once
It was, yeah.
while doing the main Marvel storylines. You could walk there was a period in time where you could walk out of a comic book shop with 20 different Marvel comics, and you would be dealing with 5 or 6 or 7 different time frames completely for multiple characters of the same type, like Iron Man, Wolverine, Cyclops, or X-Men, like. And you'd be like, wait a minute, what the hell is going on?
I distinctly remember going to the comic shop and picking up Ultimate X-Men, New X-Men, and then saying like, okay, I'll give this Uncanny X-Men book a shot now. And, you know, of course I love New X-Men, and we already have established that Ultimate X-Men was in its own timeline. But Uncanny X-Men, which was kind of like running parallel to New X-Men, just was more like the movies basically at that point in time. And it was so, the 3 of those were so disconnected. I was like, I actually dropped Ultimate X-Men and Uncanny X-Men and just stuck with New X-Men in that moment.
Yeah,
that makes sense.
I'll go a step further. Like New X-Men and Ultimate X-Men made normal Marvel comics look like garbage.
Yeah.
I'll just say it.
Yeah, that's fair. That's totally fair.
There was no point in following canon X-Men for a while.
Right, yeah.
Well, that's why some of those creators left.
I know New X-Men was canon. But Troy's right, and New X-Men and Uncanny were in the same universe.
Well, that's why some of those creators left.
And then Extreme X-Men with Chris Claremont was running the same. It was a whole thing. Yeah.
I know Kurt Busiek ended up leaving the Avengers because. Well, I'll take that back. I heard, so I don't know, but I've heard that the reason Kurt Busiek left Avengers was because the Ultimates was being so heavily pimped, where his book was just like, George Perez is doing that. Who cares?
But that's the sea change I'm talking about. That is exactly what I'm talking about. You had this new cool thing. I mean, this was the most obvious. I think this is one of the most obvious changing of the guards we ever had in comics. Like, you probably have to go back to like Giant Size X-Men to really see a changing of style and storytelling, right? Versus what we got with the Ultimates and what the Ultimates shepherded. Because again, prior to that, I mean, Iron Man was an also-ran character. The Avengers was an also-ran book. Captain America was interesting, but he wasn't the main. He wasn't the driving force that he is now.
Everything was X-Men and Spider-Man.
They were struggling to reinvent Punisher. They were struggling.
No. He was an angel. He was an angel. It was.
Yeah, that was garbage. That was hot garbage. I read the book. but then Ultimates hit, and then that fed into the main universe again. So that's when 2010 hit. That's when Ultimates was dead. They still did it, but that's when the rest of Marvel got caught up with the Ultimates. But that's a whole generation of, like you said, Kurt Busiek and all those other guys, or Ed Brubaker, or what, George Perez, like that whole style. That's when it fell off because this took over.
Yeah. No, actually, I guess that gave way to Avengers Disassembled, which really is the moment, I think personally, when the inmates started to run the asylum, right? And I mean, and Marvel became better for it, but like that was the point that it was like, okay, the Ultimate guys are doing a good job. Just give them the reins of the regular lines and see what happens. And from there, you get New Avengers. Of course, Bendis is already doing Daredevil. Miller jumps over to Wolverine for a little bit and does Enemy of the State, which is so much fun, right? Yes. And this is Marvel Knights becomes like Max. Like,
Old Man Logan comes out of that too.
Old Man Logan comes out of that. But freaking Mark Miller's doing Spider-Man for a little bit there too as well. Yes. Like, like there's just so much insanity. But meanwhile,
that's what I'm talking about. That's when Canon Marvel took over and Ultimates became, an also ran. It was
I was gonna say. Meanwhile, the Ultimates kind of enters this era where it's like, okay, Ultimate Spider-Man is like the most consistent thing that's running at this time, right? And I love Ultimate Spider-Man for that. But meanwhile, we enter this needlessly convoluted rebrand era where the titles, like literally the title of the books get more convoluted. And so I think if I remember correctly, it goes from, so we get Ultimatum, right? And then that shifts over to Ultimate Comics Avengers, which is what Loeb is doing at the time. And meanwhile, Miller's doing Ultimate Comics Adventures, and Loeb is doing Ultimate Comics New Ultimates, right? So literally, the titles are becoming more confusing during the course of this, and we transition to Ultimate Comics The Ultimates, which becomes Hickman's book, and I think Sam Humphrey takes over for a period on top of that, and so that also becomes, and like that run is good. You know what I mean? Like, it's a good run, but now it's kind of getting to the point, like, why are we still doing this?
Yeah.
You
Isn't that Hickman run where the Maker shows up?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Bendis creates. Bendis introduces Evil Reed in Ultimate Doomsday, which is not nearly as good as I remembered it being when I was a kid. But like
Ultimate Doomsday.
Yeah. So that was the story that establishes Reed as being like incel Doctor Doom. Because after Ultimatum, Reed proposes to Sue, and she says, "No, my dad just died. You psychopath. What's wrong with you?" So then Reed goes off the deep end, and he's like, "I don't need a woman. I don't need to be with friends ever again."
And his time.
He like blows up his house, and he tries to tie up like other loose ends by introducing like some of the Negative Zone creatures from the Warren Ellis run on Ultimate Fantastic Four.
Okay.
Because they start working for him, and he's gonna try to like build this like new utopia in the Negative Zone. And I mean, everyone stops him eventually, but like, yeah, that's where Evil Reed comes from.
Yeah.
And then Hickman does Death of Ultimate Spider-Man happens just after that.
Right. Yeah.
And then you get Ultimate Fallout. And then Reed becomes the Maker at the end of Ultimate Fallout.
Yes, that's right.
And then that all kind of like leads into the Hickman era of the Ultimates, which then dovetails into Secret Invasion, and now not Secret Invasion, Secret War.
Yeah.
And now we're kind of in that like post-Secret Wars era where the Maker is like, for all intents and purposes, like new Doctor Doom.
And I have to say, like, you got to give Hickman credit, man. Like, he at least is giving you the continuity that fans have demanded from like these big two companies for a while now. Like, if you're following a Hickman book, there's a payoff somewhere. Like, you know what I mean? It might be 2 years from now, 3 years from now, 5 years from now, 10 years from now, but there's a payoff.
Even if you don't see it, like in Shield, it's like why is Leonardo da Vinci here? Why is he God? What's happening? All pays off in like Fantastic Four when you find out that like Tony and Reed's dads used to work for Shield, like ancient Illuminati.
Absolutely. It's just good, like great. All right, so we're at the 1:30 mark, guys. Right? We covered the main 3 books, right? We didn't get to talk, and I see people in the comments saying like, "What about Ultimate Hulk versus Wolverine?" Like, you know what I mean? What about this? Right? Yeah. Right.
Oh my
what about Return of the King? Right? Like, that was a whole crossover.
Oh, that's really good.
Yeah. You know what I mean?
I could talk about Ultimate Hulk versus Ultimate Wolverine real quick.
Go for it.
I mean, that was one of the craziest experiences I ever had in comics. Where did he make it to 3 issues or 2 issues before
he finished the book?
No, he finished it, but that break was what, a year?
It was a year and a half for 3 issues.
Okay.
It was a year and a half for 3 issues. You're talking about like one single greatest issue ever, number 1.
Number 1, right?
maybe number 2, and then number 3 was like, what the hell did I just read? Like, this is how you end this? And it was the worst.
Was it only 3 issues?
Yes, 3 issues.
It was very short. And the first issue had so much promise, and the last issue was bunk. Like,
you know what? Actually, I talk a lot about the bank of trust with creators, right? And like, if you're a comic book fan, like not just a fan of movies, Damon Lindelof's bank of trust is even lower. I kind of feel with most people.
He completely lost me. Never mind. I'm not really a fan of any of his work, so it's a huge grain of salt here. But that book ended completely out of continuity. Like it set something up that happened a year ago. It was so pathetic. Like you waited a year to give me this.
Right, that's true. Yeah, you're right.
Well, that's like the weird thing with the Ultimate Universe too. Like that, it was constant lateness for titles.
Yeah.
Coupled with
delays are a big part of it. Yeah.
One of the funniest, one of the most egregious points of that is in Ultimates 2, where you have George Bush after he's been like reelected, between the last arc of Ultimates 2, but like they're flying out of the plane, and George Bush is like calling out to his vice president. I can't remember the first VP's name, but like he calls it to like the second VP, because George Bush is like, he's been reelected as a new VP now. It's like, oh god, this book took a long time to come out.
Time to get made. Yeah, exactly.
Long time to come out. That was also just like a Marvel issue in general around that time period. I know other books suffer that too.
Well, you know, I would say like you got to look at the to Derek's point earlier, the nature of the art had really shifted. Yeah, and I think that is also an aspect of it, where you kind of have to go, okay, we're getting like damn near photorealism from Brian Hitch on this, like
Well, there's also, to your point, Astonishing X-Men, right? That was occurring, and I was at the Baltimore Comic Con, one of my favorites. I waited in line to get John Cassidy artwork. No lie, it was 2-3 blocks long. This line. This was the height of Astonishing X-Men. Everybody knew who he was. He was working with Josh Whedon. This was before Josh Whedon directed Avengers.
Yeah, it was.
This was a movie guy working on the comics, just like, to be fair to Damon Lindelof. Yeah. Damon Lindelof was working on whatever he was working on, Lost. So the height of his popularity when he was doing the Wolverine versus Hulk comic, whatever the hell it's called. But I waited in that line for a solid half hour. And then I finally realized why when I was talking to John. John Cassidy. I don't know him personally. But the way he was drawing was like this.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And he took five minutes to give me my drawing. I cherish it. But then it made me realize, oh, no wonder, between Josh Whedon working on major studio stuff and this guy doing his damnedest to give us this, like you're saying, pitch perfect, photorealistic art. No wonder this thing's late. And then it's no surprise that John Cassidy switched to just doing covers.
Just doing covers, right? Brian Hitch was just doing covers for a while too, and I can't blame him. But all right, let's wrap this up, guys. Closing statements about the Ultimates. Grady, you've been quiet for a while. Grady, closing statements. Get it all off your chest.
Well, yeah, I'll just bring it back to what I was saying earlier, that I think we need, I guess this is kind of a controversial way to end this, but I think we need a Ultimates that talks about the Ukraine war. Like I think we need right now the sort of perspective is Putin is this great supervillain and Zelensky is the Avengers or Captain America or something to that effect. And we just need Captain America to punch Hitler, basically. And I think that it's a much more complicated situation than that. And this is directly in continuity with the Iraq War. This is about American imperialism and American hegemony expanding. And we need a comic that could really critique our side of it and not just manufacture consent for us to, for our side to kill more Russians, basically.
I will point out, actually, Secret Invasion. I noted, actually, when I was watching Secret Invasion the other day, that it's about a proxy war between America and Russia. And I thought that was very interesting. That's a story that's in that, and they show this on Disney Plus. Mystical Green Beanie, closing statements about the Ultimates.
That was brilliant, Grady. My closing statement is that Hank Pym wore the Captain America costume, and Valkyrie was very happy.
Oh Jesus, I forgot about that too. That was a Jeff Loeb thing, wasn't it?
No, that was Mark Miller.
Is that Mark Miller? Okay,
that was Mark Miller.
Gotcha.
You see the Captain America costume in the background on the bed? Yeah.
Okay.
After he got beat up like half.
Interesting. That's right. Derek, closing statements about the Ultimates.
You have to enjoy the good stuff while it lasts, and then hold on to it and keep it on your shelf, and then spread the good news to other people. Really glad we did this, and we're talking about our history, and also what Grady said. But yeah, really glad to just when you have a special thing like the Ultimates, enjoy it, keep it, and share it.
One thing that I thought about while we were talking about this, and I guess this will be my closing statement, is this particular era of superhero comics got me back into comics, and so I learned two valuable lessons during the course of the '90s downturn, right when I stopped reading superhero comics, and the early 2000s return when I started reading again, which is like, it's less about following the characters and more about following the creators, because the creators maintain their continuity, right? Because truthfully, at this point, back in the day when Stan Lee was editing like 15, I'll say, 10 or 11 books at the same time, it made sense to be like, okay, we have a very linear continuity. Now there's like 20, 30 books on the shelf at any given moment. And, I think it's important that, you follow the creators, because the creators are making these books. The creators are the important part of this process. But also it's a more wholly satisfying experience when you do that. And I learned that lesson because of falling off in the 90s and coming back in the 2000s. And all of these UK guys are making comics now and just kicking the wheels off. And I'm like, this I like. And I still like this on top of that. That's it, guys. I appreciate you coming through. Hopefully we didn't ruffle any feathers. Well, we probably did, but that's okay
too. Do plugs?
I was gonna say we're definitely gonna do plugs. We're definitely gonna do plugs. It's all good, man. Up first, Grady, is there anything you want to plug?
Just Jack Genocide 2 on Instagram.
Okay.
Yeah.
When he's not banned, I should point out. As you probably noticed from some of the things he said today. Mystical Green Beanie, where can people find you?
You can find me on YouTube, Instagram, and Twitter at either Mystical Green Beanie or MG Beanie. I got a new video coming out later next week, so look for it.
Okay. All right. Cool. Derek, where can people find you?
Yeah, funny story. As soon as Grady started talking about that last bit, my computer screen went blank. So, see what happens. But no, in all seriousness, you can follow me on Instagram at Derek Scar, just DEREK Scar. Also at Action A Go Go. Got 2 accounts, and also you can buy my books. I've got The Vicious Game available on Amazon, and Knuckle Crack Bone available on Amazon. So buy my books, read my stuff.
All right. And I guess that's it, guys. I want to point out that, look, we were naysaying some of the modern comics like during this episode, right? But here's the thing. All of us are reading comics currently. Well, maybe not Derek, but the 3 of us are reading comics currently that are currently in your comic shop, right? And so the byproduct of this, and also is like I just said, hey, you follow creators, right? There's a lot of amazing creators doing a lot of amazing things, that are also at the big 2, but also doing their own stuff independently. And you know where you can find all that stuff, guys? Previews catalog. New catalog dropped today on our website. It is live now. This is the July catalog. You can definitely browse now by going to PREVIEWSworld.com/catalog, but also go to your local comic shop this Wednesday and pick up a physical copy of the Previews catalog, because it will be available this upcoming Wednesday. What you got there, Joaquin? Look like you're about to show us something.
Yeah, man. Like I'll trash new comics, but I'll still buy them. I'll still buy them. There's a lot of good stuff coming out.
There's a lot of good stuff coming out. Look, Batman's good right now. Captain America's good right now. I just like the Ultimate Invasion's really cool. There's a lot of really good stuff.
Big Game coming out. Mark Miller's coming out in July.
Yeah. All right, big games coming out. That's going to be a lot of fun. It's a crossover between Wanted and Kick-Ass and Kingsman from Mark Miller. That's going to be a lot of fun. I should definitely point that out.
New X-Men event right now.
Yeah, some of the X.
X-Men.
Yeah,
yeah. So definitely go to your local comic shop and support your local comic shop on top of that. Hey, guys, go read Ultimate. Was it Ultimate Avengers, the one with Red Skull? Because that's a great. That's
Yes.
the third. That's the third Ultimate story to me. And on that note, guys, thank you very much for coming into the roundtable. We're going to do this next month. I'm kind of plotting that we might do one about Superman's relevance or irrelevance. We're going to talk about that. You know, like, because that seems to be a common conversation that people like to have. And I think we're going to sit here and try to disprove some of that. But I'm going to try to bring somebody on who definitely thinks that Superman is irrelevant. Because I
only if we all wear like our underwear on the outside during that whole stream.
We all wear our underwear on the outside during that stream. Yeah. Okay, we'll coordinate that later. Later.
Oh.
But thank you very much, guys, and thank you everyone who's been watching for hanging out with us here at Previews World. And look for us again next month as we tackle some more roundtable discussions. Have a good one, guys. Catch you all later.
Take care.